Hi everyone, Daljit Peterson here from astrolab21.com. Today's video is going to be about Sagittarius season 2022. We're about to shift into the third and final phase of fall, the autumnal season that began with the autumnal equinox back in Libra, in that cardinal air sign of fall. We went through the middle portion of it with the fixed water of Scorpio in the middle of fall, and now we're moving to that third and final phase where we mutate out of it, a mutable fire sign of Sagittarius. So a lot to look forward to as we approach this month to come. But before we go forward, I do want to go backward and review what we did experience with some hindsight in the recent Scorpio season, and particularly what we had was eclipse season during this year's Scorpio season. So a very intense, once in every 18-year cycle. So some things we talked about and sort of looked forward to expect did play out. Some things in a different way than we would have expected. But I want to point out how astrology is archetypally predictive of events that will unfold. And what happened over the course of the last week, not only in the political sphere, but in the financial sphere, for any of you following cryptocurrencies, a massive collapse in one of the second largest exchange, a huge scandal that unfolded right during the eclipse in many ways. So we'll take a look at that astrologically and archetypally and see what we can discern. So lots to get to, so let's just jump right in. I'll share my screen here. And calling this moving from shadow to light for a couple of reasons. Obviously, we had a Scorpio eclipse, Scorpio, a sign and an archetype that's very comfortable with the shadow, right? We talk about shadow work a lot when we talk about Scorpio. It's the sign of psychotherapy, depth psychology, really getting into the deep nitty-gritty of relationships and work and doing deep shadow work. And often what we get when we move from Scorpio into Sagittarius is this movement from that depth of experience that we have in Scorpio, often a trial and a tribulation, sometimes traumatic, always soul-searching, maybe we call the dark night of the soul, right? And then as we come back through Sagittarius, it's like, okay, now we bring all of that unconscious material up into the light of consciousness and process it in a way that makes sense of the experiences of the Scorpio trial, if you will. So that's kind of what I'm referring to here when we talk about Scorpio season. But I do want to just jump to the charts and sort of review some of the things we talked about in the last video. And I'm going to start with that full lunar eclipse in Taurus that we had on November 8th, right? So we talked about it. Okay, this was election, the midterm elections here in America on the exact day. We talked about this Scorpio-Taurus axis as being an axis of value, axis of resources. It was really highlighting issues of particularly women's reproductive rights. You can't get a more apt symbol for that than a full moon in Taurus, and an eclipse moon at that. So that was sort of on the ballot. It was a referendum and was expected to really motivate a lot of voters to the polls here in America. And it turned out it did, right? There was this expected red wave. People thought the Republicans would really just sort of have a huge red wave here. It's typical that the party in power tends to get clobbered in midterm elections. But this beat historical precedents where the Democrats held the Senate, lost the House by a much narrower majority than expected. And it seems that a lot of people were motivated by those values. But something even bigger occurred over the course of the days around this eclipse. And if we take a look, let's just highlight here what we were dealing with once again, right? We had massive stellium going on in Scorpio with Sun, Venus, and Mercury all conjuncting the south node, and then we had the moon, full moon in Taurus, exact conjunct Uranus with the north node, right? So this creates the lunar eclipse, a full lunar eclipse, right? Because they're occurring next to, very close to these nodal axis points. This is where the eclipses occur. And this is why the nodes of the moon, I talk about it a lot on my channel here and in my writings, Certainly as someone who comes from a evolutionary astrology background, right? Pluto and the nodes are one of the key indicators of chart analysis in the evolutionary astrology or EA method. So I'm always super focused on the nodal axis. And as it's been moving in its 18-month cycle back through the signs of Scorpio and Taurus respectively, that's been a major theme for us over the course of this period, really getting into this axis of value. Where are we coming from? Where are we going? What do we value? What are our resources? All right, Taurus is the sign of resources. And our most valuable resource, our asset, is our own body, right? Most important resource we have. And so how do we care for our body? Right? How do we take care of ourselves, our well-being, nurturing, sustenance, food, water, resources, right? These all are under the auspices of the sign of Taurus. So when we had this eclipse in Taurus with Uranus, and the other factor we have going on is we talked about, right? This was also in square to Saturn in Aquarius, right? So this was as an astrologer, I look at the constellations and the patterns of the month. This was like, oh, this is the big moment of Scorpio season. And I think it proved to be. Now, the other thing about value, and I've talked about this a lot regarding the Saturn-Uranus square that we've been in since early 2020, right? It's a long 2-year period that this was a challenge to we talk about Taurus rules money and resources and value. So with Uranus moving through Taurus for the 7-year period, it was expected that there would be a revolution, a change in how we value things and in our monetary system, the financial system. And then you have Saturn squaring that from Aquarius, right? I've thought of this as the emerging cryptocurrency space was the perfect example of this archetypal metaphor, this clash of the titans, which has shown up in many ways, but this is one in specific I've talked about a lot over the past couple of years. And so when we had this fantastic, dramatic collapse of the FTX, which is the second largest cryptocurrency exchange, and they lost $32 billion in the matter of hours or in a couple of days. $32 billion. It turns out this looks like probably the biggest Ponzi scheme in history, even overshadowing the Bernie Madoff period, right? And this sort of charismatic figure, Sam Bankman-Fried, who was like this wonderkind, 29 years old. Here's a kid who just coming through his first Saturn return. It would be interesting to look at his chart. Maybe we'll do that on another time. But, was compared to the next Warren Buffett, was a darling of media and celebrities, right? If you watched the Super Bowl in the last year, it's like FTX was sponsoring it with Larry David and Tom Brady. And, this was supposed to be the cryptocurrency exchange. Turns out it was a massive fraud. Right. So these are the kind of things you can expect in an eclipse during a Scorpio Taurus full moon eclipse, right? Scorpio all about other people's assets, money management. We always associate the 8th house Scorpio Pluto with management of other people's assets, inheritances and financial planning. It's all come to the auspices of Scorpio in the 8th house. So here we had someone mismanaging other people's assets, and it got exposed during a lunar eclipse. Taurus, the moon, Uranus, all being eclipsed. So that technology, right? Uranus is an innovator. It wants to change. And cryptocurrency is a very Uranian type of ethos that they're at the core of what it's about. And it's in conflict with Saturn in Aquarius, right? The rules, the regulations, the financial system, the traditional financial system, old money clashing with new money. And so this was an incredible shakeup. And just as I was watching it unfold and watching for what was happening during this eclipse, obviously I was expecting something huge and unexpected, right? Uranus is always the symbol of the unexpected. Well, this caught everyone by surprise. $32 billion. A lot of people got wrecked. So it's tragic. It's which is also sometimes, we talked about Scorpio can be a very traumatic, tragic event. And we certainly got that. And so we'll be dealing with this and the fallout of it probably for some time to come, which does lead nicely to talking about Sagittarius season. Because one of the things that when we think about the seasonal shift, right, what happens when we move from Scorpio into Sag, right, from the depths of that watery fixed sign of Scorpio, where we're processing a lot of times deep emotional material, unconscious material that percolates and it has to be processed. And we have these intense experiences. As we move into Sagittarius now, that comes up from the depths of the unconscious and into the conscious mind and has to be processed in an intellectual way, in a spiritual way, in a right fire. Think of mutable fire. That mutable fire of Sagittarius is going to transmute the transformational experiences of that depth of that fixed water Scorpio. So always we see this, it's playing out on every level, right? This is happening personally, individually, interpersonally, collectively, right? We can see it operating at all levels, at all times. So that's what we want to be aware of as we move into Sag season. So that'll be a good way of sort of segueing into Sag season proper. So enough looking backwards. Let's now move forward and let's just talk a little bit about. I was going to revisit the Pluto or the Saturn Uranus square here, but maybe we'll skip over that in the sake of time. But this has been ongoing. I would recommend, if you haven't seen the video I did on the Pluto or the Saturn Uranus square, I'd highly recommend it. But one of the things I did want to highlight, right, is like sudden shocks and rude awakenings. So if this FTX thing wasn't that, I don't know what is. So we've been seeing a lot of the shadow qualities of Saturn-Uranus square, this tension, just difficulty navigating these two somewhat antithetical energies that are vying for recognition. Here we had all of the energies represented by this full moon eclipse, right? Taurus versus Scorpio, where we had Sun, Moon, Aquarius, where Saturn was. If you just look at that word cloud and that combination, that trifecta of archetypes, you can see where the difficulty lies. You know, not all of these are going to necessarily commingle very well. It's difficult sometimes to rectify, right? But what we do see, right, whenever you get squares, it always involves signs of the same modality. So this was a fixed square. It means that everyone is holding to their position in a fixed way. They're digging their heels in, right? If you're Scorpio, you're going to dig your heels in fixed water to your emotional core, right? Taurus digs its heels into the earth. It says, I am, right? It's the bull. It's stubborn. I'm not going to move. I'm going to stay true to my own instincts at a bodily level, at a physical level. I'm going to only trust my five senses, right? Scorpios, I'm only going to entrust my emotional body. And then Aquarius digs into its mental capacities. It says, I only trust my ideas and my ideals and what I can prove scientifically, in terms of a very objective viewpoint. So you can see this fixed dynamic, which was at play during this eclipse. But, something's got to give, right? One of these was going to emerge as a dominant player. And we'll be dealing with the fallout of this probably for the next several days, weeks, and even months as all of this is unpacked and unfolded. But this is what happens, and this is why I think astrology is so useful, right? It's showing us these archetypal configurations that are unfolding all the time, but certain moments and places in time will have more impact than others. And it's not just the days and weeks around these aspects, these hard aspects that we see, but the impact is felt for days, weeks, months, and sometimes years afterward when we're talking about Pluto transits, Neptune, Uranus, the outer planets. So just really good to be able to grapple with all of these things, understand and see them unfolding in the world around us, and also reflect on how is that affecting me personally? What is my own dynamic with these fixed signs and the planets and the functions moving through them? How am I reconciling my own emotional core with my bodily instincts and my intellect, right? What am I holding on to too stubbornly? What's creating tensions within myself, within my relationships, at work, in my community? And how is that showing up? And how can I work through these archetypes in a way that is much more holistic, beneficial, that promotes our own personal, spiritual evolution? So that's why we do it. That's why we examine these things. But let's move forward now and talk about Sag season, right? So what are we talking about? We're talking about a month where the sun is moving through the sign of Sagittarius. And wherever the sun is during its annual cycle, it tends to shine its light. It tends to wear the costume, if you will, of that sign. So sun is going to wear Sagittarius for a month starting on November 22nd. And so here we talk about the mutable fire of Sagittarius. This is all about understanding. It wants to really be able to see the biggest picture possible, right? Remember, Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. So as the sun moves through Sagittarius, it takes on the qualities of that Jupiter function, which is expansion, which is seeing the broadest picture possible. It's the gas giant of the solar system. It's orders of magnitude larger than most of the planets in our solar system. So it has this sort of future-oriented, idealistic, positive aspect to it. It's also very much concerned with natural law. It really wants to understand, how does the universe work? And what is our place in it? How do we fit into this? What is the bigger pattern, right? I think of it as God, Jupiter, in terms of like the conception of what is the intelligence behind the universe. So it's very positive, it's expansive, and so I feel like we'll be getting a bit of a relief, if you will, coming out of this Scorpio season. So let's jump back into the chart here, and let's start to look at Sag season proper, which will begin on 11/22/22, right? For those of you who are numerologically inclined, seems like a pretty auspicious day, 11/22/22. But what happens is we get sun moving into Sag, and on that day, it's interesting that the moon is in Scorpio at that moment, revisiting the point of the solar eclipse that happened at the beginning of the solar season, of the eclipse season, right? So maybe indicating that some of the residue from that eclipse, both of those eclipses, is probably going to linger for us as we move through Sag season. There's still a lot of work to process, a lot of the emotional and traumatic experiences that maybe many of us experienced over the course of that eclipse, or what was revealed, right? If you did your work and you really were looking deeply into your own soul, right, that dark night of the soul, that this eclipse was really trying to bring out in us. What did come up, right? And now we're going to bring it into conscious light, and we're going to try to process it over the course of this month. So we've survived the trial of Scorpio. Now it's time to bring the boon up, right? If you think about the move to the underworld, right? Scorpio is that descent into the underworld, but we come back. The hero's journey is to come back with the boon, to mine the gold and bring it back up into the light of consciousness so that it can benefit ourselves as individuals and benefit society as a whole. So that's kind of the sort of meta theme of this transition and this move into Sag season. So, and we get a really nice start to Sag season here, because we're getting a conjunction of Venus and Mercury there, about 7 degrees of Sag, just as we begin. What's nice is these are both just coming through their superior conjunction with the sun, which means they're on the other side of the sun. And let me just show you that. I'm going to bring that up. Here I had a diagram, or the model of the full moon, which was interesting, right? And what happens in a full lunar eclipse, right, is that the Earth is in between the sun and the moon. So it's blocking the sun's light on the moon, which normally would illuminate the full moon. But because it's occurring at this point in the sky where the lunar nodes are, where the moon crosses the ecliptic, it creates this optical phenomenon of the eclipse. But what I wanted to point out when we talk about both Mercury and Venus, their superior conjunction is what occurs when they're on the other side of the sun from the Earth, right? As opposed to being between the Earth and the sun. This is where they have their inferior conjunctions. This is where Mercury and Venus experience their retrograde periods. So these are much weaker times, I feel like, for those two planets. But when they both align together in their superior conjunction here, they're moving on the other side. They're starting to move much more quickly from our perspective here on Earth. And they're kind of like illuminated by the sun. They've been giving the blessing of the sun. And now they're going to move forward in a way to really generate their respective functionalities in a way that is more harmonious, that's in sync, right? So this is a syncing up of our mental capacity, right, with Mercury, with our sort of emotional capacity, our feeling nature with Venus. What we're attracted to, what we love, what we enjoy is getting a boost from the sun in Sagittarius, expanding, as well as our mental process, our communication style, our interactions with others is a very harmonious sort of start to Sagittarius season, and I think a welcome reprise from the intensity that we've been dealing with in the last few months. It's the starting, things are lightening up a little bit for us in the astrological weather, which I think many of us will find as a relief. So that's a nice sort of beneficial beginning. So it's like what we talked about. It's a good time to process everything we've gone through over the last month. Bring that deep material from the depths up into consciousness. There's a gentleness to approaching these topics and these interpersonal relationships. This is a great time to have those dialogues with relationships, with partners, with loved ones, with family. We'll be moving into Thanksgiving here next week during Sag season, right here where we kick off. So a good time to gather around the table and to just appreciate one another, to be kind, to listen, right? Venus is the listening function. And so when we get Venus together with Mercury, we really have a higher capacity to listen in a much more compassionate, generous way, right? Sagittarius, really be open-minded, and you might be surprised by what you learn from your friends, your family, your colleagues, your loved ones, by listening in a new way, and sharing those experiences and being honest and being truthful, right? There's a sort of beauty to be had in exploring ourselves in a more true and a more transparent way, right? We're coming from that Scorpio and that eclipse where things are hidden, and then things got revealed, right? The hidden gets revealed, some of it becomes more obscured, it gets murky, right? And so there's a lot of processing that needs to be done. I feel like this is a great time for processing deep emotional experiences and insights. Any of us who are in any sort of psychotherapeutic practice, I would expect that a lot came up during the last month. And now in that process, you may be getting a lot more insight and a more conscious awareness of what you've been going through, what you've been processing. Remember that South Node is all about the past. This whole year, this 18-month cycle, as we've been talking about a lot, is about, right, letting go of some of that emotional baggage so that we can be embodied in a new way moving forward, Taurus. So, good week for that. Hopefully we all get a chance to have some of that feeling of a big exhale that Sagittarius, sort of allows for. Okay, so let me just check my notes here, where I want to move to next. I wrote an article about this, the start of Sag season, and to this effect, right, of bringing it to the light of consciousness. And what they say is, sunlight is the greatest antiseptic, right? So if that's the case, then the sun in Sagittarius is like a cosmic Mr. Clean. So, chew on that and think about that, to do some real soul searching and soul cleansing, really. It's a soul cleansing time. A lot to be revealed. The next thing, I want to highlight here is we still have Mars retrograde through Mercury. This is going to go on, or through Gemini. I always do that. Sorry. Take a sip of coffee here. I need to. And we can see there's a couple of really important aspects that Mars is going to make during its retrograde through these next few degrees here. And it's already going to be in effect when we start Sag season, but it's going to be in a nice sextile aspect with Saturn, but also it's moving into this square with Neptune and Pisces. So we talked about it a little, but we should really be thinking about this Mars retrograde through Gemini, right? It's spending its entire retrograde period in the sign. This means it's going to be spending an enormous amount of time in Gemini. So this retreat of our aggression, of our capacity to do, right? Mars is the doer of the zodiac. And so it's retrograding through Mercury, through this mental, mutable air sign. It can be tricky. It's difficult. We're going to have to watch our words and bite our tongues, and we just, it can be, there's some frustration here, some mental frustration, some frustration and communication with others. Certainly this Saturn sextile, though, really is, I think, a time during this week and in the coming weeks, the first couple weeks of Sag season, to really bring a sense of Saturn, right? A sense of authority, a sense of discipline, a sense of patience to our communication style, to our thought process, right? That Mars in Gemini getting that Saturn from Aquarius in a gentle way, in a kind way, in a facilitating, I think, more sobering attitudes. We really want to look at check ourselves in terms of how are we expressing ourselves, how are we communicating, what are we saying. This is not a time for flippant, trivial, bullshit, honestly, that a lot of us may be engaging in on a regular basis if we're very active in social media, right? Saturn in Aquarius. Aquarius is the sign of social media. Time for some real talk, tough talk, honest, sober dialogue. If we're honest with ourselves, if we get down to sort of brass tacks and what is the bottom line of what we're about and what we're trying to express and communicate, really good time for frank dialogue, candid, frank dialogue to occur. Be the best way to use this Mars retrograde Gemini energy. Of course, it can always manifest, right? The shadow side can show up here with, sort of false authority, right? Or just a lot of censorship. And it's very interesting what's going on. If you're following, as I am, I'm fascinated by, Elon Musk always fascinates me, and this Twitter, what would we call it? I don't know. I don't want to call it a debacle, but it just seems to be such a distraction for someone who's so focused on doing so many things in the world. But it's important to him. But, he's talked about this being about free speech, but he keeps censoring people who are criticizing him and firing people who disagree with him, very much sort of resonating with this pattern, right, of Saturn in Aquarius, the authority. I am the authority. I am the genius, Aquarius. I am the progressive thinker. I am the engineer who has the master plan. And I am also Saturn. I am the ruler. I am the CEO. And I will tell you what is true and what is not true. I will tell you what is free speech and not free speech. Dealing with Mars in Gemini retrograde. Very interesting. So not to put too much pressure on Elon Musk, but we're all doing that, and it's creating a shitstorm of shit posting, and we're getting a lot of this impersonating of corporations and people. It's really an interesting time, right? And it's very appropriate to the astrology, the astrological weather that we're looking at, right? We also get Neptune involved here, right? So that square to Neptune. So now we've gotten not just so that sobering clarity that Saturn connection brings to this Mars and Gemini now gets clouded with Neptune, with the deception, with the delusion. This also makes me think of the cryptocurrency fallout we've had in the last couple of weeks, right? It was a massive deception. The illusion, the dream has been, the balloon has been popped, right? And we'll also talk about, bubbles bursting. And I think there's a lot of bubbles that we've been building up here in a lot of sectors of our economy, in a lot of our social media environments that are about to get pierced. And so this can be a really challenging time for us to think clearly through the confusion. A lot of this Neptunian energy from Pisces is going to could muddy the waters quite a bit. So we just want to be aware of that. We want to make sure we double check our sources. Whose information are we getting? What is their motivation? Are they coming from a place of truth and authenticity? Or are they self-deluding themselves? It could be just a lot of murky waters for us as we try to navigate this season and try to bring a level of higher consciousness to this whole thing. So that's that. What else do we want to talk about? Yeah, I guess we'll look at the new moon in Sagittarius. If we move forward here. When's that? A little too far. We gotta go hour by hour here. Looks like, here we go. 1 degree of Sagittarius. So another one of these new moons beginning at the very early degrees of the season. So on the very next day, right, November 23rd, we get the new moon in Sagittarius. And this is just going to add to, I feel like, this sense of renewal, this sense of cleansing, this sense of the sense of release, the sense of exhale, and of really trying to bring ourselves up to a much higher level of consciousness, of awareness, of focus. You can't help but see that when you get this kind of energy, all within 10 degrees, this is the Sag stellium really bodes well for all things Sagittarius. Again, all of those expansive qualities, the sense of really wanting to aspire to the highest level of our existence, really being aware of other people too. This is a really multi-perspectival archetype. It's unlike Gemini, the opposite, right, sign, where Gemini is a very focused, it gets into the minutia of the data and the details. Sag, on the other hand, is like, what is the biggest picture? What is the largest frame I can take in? How can I broaden my horizons? That's why it's associated often with foreign people, foreign travel, foreign ideas, right? We want to get a multi-perspectival view of our world. We want to change our world view to match the bigger picture information, to assimilate the higher wisdom and knowledge that is there. So, great time to really review and renew your philosophical, spiritual, metaphysical, religious ideologies. Do they still hold water? Are there new ideas and perspectives that you're getting exposed to that you need to incorporate into your way of thinking, Mercury, into your emotional body, right? Moon, Venus, right? We're getting this chance to really ground ourselves in a much more firmer philosophical territory, if you will. And the other thing that we're going to see, I want to get to, what day is that? November 24th. So a lot happening in this first 3 days of Sag season. It really starts off with a lot of energy, because then on the November 24th, what we're going to get is Jupiter is going to station direct in Pisces. So it's been retrograding, right? We had a period of Jupiter in Aries, sort of a preview earlier in the year from, I think it went in like May, and then it started retrograding, I think, back in August, and moved back through Aries and then back into Pisces, where it has been for the last year. And in many ways, this is the end of a 12-year cycle of Jupiter. Jupiter's orbit is 12 years, so it takes about that time to go through the whole zodiac. And so when it moves from Pisces into Aries, right, anytime we get an outer planet crossing that threshold, any planet for that matter, but it tends to really, it's gone its full cycle through the entire zodiac, and it's like a reset, right? When we move across the boundary between Pisces and Aries, we're leaving the womb, we're reborn again into a fresh new cycle. So really interesting time to be reflecting on the 12 years that we've just had, right? Think about from now, since 2010, where we've been, what we've gone through, and particularly this time as Jupiter ends its time in Pisces, right? And I think it's a very interesting combination of archetypes. Jupiter is traditionally associated with Pisces, so it's very comfortable there, this sort of expanded consciousness, this depth and expansion of spirituality, of religiosity, metaphysical, all the things we associated with Pisces, the depth of experience, the depth of the artistic, the musical, the expressive, the oneness, the compassion, all of those things get boosted as Jupiter moves through Pisces. But as always, right, the shadow can manifest. And I think, do I have a graphic here of, yeah, here we go, Jupiter and Pisces. So we're getting our last chance to experience this combination of archetypes. So, you know, we could get a great deal of self-awareness, expansion, growth in the areas of our belief system, of our ability to be compassionate, to tap into our deeper intuitive sensibilities, our emotional nature, our healing capacities. All these things get boosted, right? But we can also get the shadow side, right? You can clearly see, you can get something like, you know, a fanatical spiritual, right? You can get a, you know, overindulgent in fantasies, right? Exuberant sensitivity, right? Massive deception. All of these things can also be constellated by this combination of symbols. So we want to just be aware of that. And I think it's just a time to really, again, seems like a month of re-examination with new information and in the new light of all we've gone through this past month, this past 12-year cycle. Where are we in our spiritual sense, in our spiritual evolution? Take this time for the next couple months to really align with what is our higher purpose. What, you know, consider where we were all 12 years ago. Presumably we've all grown quite a bit since then, right? And so good time to reflect as the year ends this year, as we make plans for the next year to come. And believe me, we're going to want to be really clear going into 2023, because there's a lot going on astrologically that's going to be quite challenging. And I think if we don't have a firm grounding in ourselves moving into that phase, a lot of us are going to get tossed around quite a bit by some you know, turbulent waters, so to speak. So really good to get clear about what you learned, what was helpful, what is not helpful, what no longer serves. It's a good time to let go of some belief systems that just don't serve us anymore, that have caused us to be deluded or self-deceiving, right? Pisces. Because as we move into Aries, you know, like I said, it's a new era will begin, right? Now we're getting into something much more pioneering and creative and direct, right? There's going to be this real sense of renewal that comes in, but only if we've sort of cleared the air. If we're still getting pulled backwards by the Pisces energy, we're going to be sort of stuck in the past. And so we want to clear the decks so that we can move into this new cycle and set the intention, right? Wherever Jupiter goes for the next 12 years, as it goes through every one of the signs, is a new chance to expand, right? And of course, that's going to fall in a different area of all of our charts, right? I know for myself, this is a move from my Pisces 4th house into my Aries 5th house. So I'm sort of getting all of my foundational things together. As I've been dealing with home issues through this whole Jupiter transit of Pisces, but I'm really excited about the next phase for me, being a Sag rising. Jupiter is my ruling planet. As it moves into Aries, it goes into my creative 5th house. I'm really excited about starting new projects creatively. It's going to be a real exciting period, but I have to make sure I'm grounded first, right, in this Jupiter Pisces period, so that I can move into it with a clean slate. So I encourage you all to think about that in terms of where does this Pisces into Aries fall in your chart, because that'll always be a place of a major transformation. It's equivalent to where your 12th and 1st house is in many ways. It's like a second 12th, 1st house threshold. Right? And you'll find that if you have planets there and that part of your life represented by those houses where Pisces and Aries falls, will always be a point where you're starting a new cycle. And so with Jupiter moving through that part of your chart, it'll be very interesting and be helpful. Align yourself with that energy, and you'll find you get a lot of benefit from tracking Jupiter, right? It's expansive quality. It's generous. It's the great and beneficent. It gives its gifts. It will open up a lot of opportunities wherever it falls in your chart. So that's what we're trying to do here. Astrolab 21 is help us all align with, how do we get on the good side of Jupiter and Saturn and understand all of these archetypes that are playing out. So, well, that's probably going to do it for this video. I know it's just the first few days of Sag season, but it's a lot to think about as we set intentions and close out. We're about to close out this year. We're going to move into Cap season with the winter solstice, and then it's on into 2023 and beyond. So we'll be doing a lot of resolutions and making intentions for the year to come. So hopefully that helps you start to make those intentions and set that compass, if you will. So if this was helpful, as always, I hope you'll like and thumbs up the video and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to have a lot more coming up for you. We'll be doing the 2023 preview. We got some massive stuff coming up in 2023. We've got both Saturn and Pluto changing signs. The shift of Pluto into Aquarius is going to be, we're going to get a preview of the several about 20 years to come, right? And it's going to back up into Capricorn. We're not out of the woods yet, but this next 18 months is going to be really pivotal as we shift gears in a massive way. And so we'll be doing a lot of deeper dives into that so that we can all prepare ourselves for what's to come. So if you subscribe, you'll always know when those videos are coming out. So yeah, until next time, Sat Nam, everyone.